Hello everyone, and welcome to my review for Kengan Omega Chapter 111. Before I get into this week's review, I of course have to mention my subscriber goal for 2021, hitting 5,000 by the end of the year. So if you're a new viewer, or if you're already a fan of my videos and you're not subscribed, you might as well to help me reach that goal. The other thing is my Patreon. If you want to help support me and the channel directly, or you want to get access to some extra content, you can always become a patron. There's a link to my Patreon down in the description. I'll be starting reviews for the Boxer tomorrow, so you should check that out if you're interested. With that out of the way, let's get on with the review. This week's chapter is actually pretty good. Last week was pretty average, but this week's chapter was very solid. I have to say, this fight is off to a very good start thus far, even better than I'd expected. I figured this fight would be pretty good, but I think it's actually going kind of better than I'd expected, at least based on this chapter. Who knows what's going to happen in the following chapters. But the start of this chapter is pretty much just explaining the difference between Sambo and Judo, mostly as a way to explain that Judo is really fucking strong. It's able to use both hard and soft martial arts, and requires a lot of muscular strength. And as a result, when you punch as a Sambo practitioner, you can punch really fucking hard. And we can see that based on what's kind of happening to Liu's face from Nitoku's uppercut. But he kind of gets out of the way using some technique called Huajin or Kake. He gets out of the way at first, but then gets thrown really hard by Nitoku, and is actually downed. And this is kind of a pattern in this fight so far, is that Nitoku hits and throws so hard that he just gets downs all the time. So Nitoku is really monstrous. And we'll see a lot of that in this chapter, but Nitoku is very strong. Like, even stronger than I had kind of considered. So Liu is kind of the underdog in this fight thus far, because he keeps using his techniques against Nitoku, and they kind of work initially, but when he uses them more than once, Nitoku already understands how they work, so they're not going to work as well again. And despite the fact that a lot of his techniques are strong enough to do a knockdown, according to Lalong, Nitoku is just way too durable. So not only does Nitoku have a lot of punching power, not only does he have both hard and soft martial arts, but he's also ridiculously durable. So the guy's kind of got everything you need to be a really good Kengan fighter. The guy is a solid A-tier fighter. I think he would do relatively well in the Annihilation tournament. At least second round, depending on his placement. But Toku's pretty fucking strong. We get a lot of commentary from Lalong this chapter, which is always pretty nice. And he explains that pretty much Liu is using a bad strategy against him. Or at the very least, Nitoku's strategy is better than Liu's. Because while Liu is very strong and his techniques are very powerful, they are not something you can use to beat someone like Nitoku. You can't beat him with just strength. Because if you keep using the same stuff on him over and over again, he's going to realize what you're doing, and it's not going to work anymore. And we see that happen. So Liu is going to have to figure out a different way in order to beat Nitoku. Not sure what that is, but we kind of get some allusions to it at the end of this chapter. After he gets knocked down again the second time. And this time, oh my god, Nitoku grabs him by the face and throws him onto the ground head first. That is one of the more vicious throws. Yeah, I guess that'd be a throw thus far in Kengan. Not as bad as the one Ryan did on Mokichi, but pretty vicious. And he is just knocking the life out of Liu here. You can really feel how fucking strong Nitoku is. Not necessarily in terms of overall power, but just the sheer force from his blows and from his throws. He's very powerful. And Liu is not seemingly much of a he's not able to take a lot of punishment. He's a little softer than some of the other fighters we've seen. So when he gets thrown around like this, it really does a number on him. And Liu is really not sure if he's going to be able to beat Nitoku. So Liu is really the underdog in this fight thus far. So that's pretty interesting for a Purgatory fighter, because for a lot of the tournament, the Purgatory fighter is immediately set up as the superior force, that the Kengan fighter is going to have a hard time going against them. Carlos is the only boxer that was better than Gao Lang. Falcon was much more competent than Rahito in general. Toa beat the shit out of Julius not long into their fight. Yumi, not really. Naidan, definitely way stronger than Ryuki from the start. Liu Tian, not really, because it was against Kano. And Allen versus, yeah. And then we had Jirota versus Hayami. Jirota was definitely the favorite to win from the start. And then in the last fight, they were fairly even, but once you got kind of started with the paralysis stuff, it was kind of obvious that, shit, Nicholas is going to have the upper hand for a bit. But from here, Nitoku is kind of dominating from the start, and Liu is going to have to think of something to, kind of take back control of the fight. Now, at the end of this chapter, he remembers Naidan, and the fact that Naidan and Nitoku's fighting styles are fairly similar. It reminds him a lot of Naidan. And in that case, that means that Liu can beat Nitoku. So, this means that, at least during a few of their fights in the past, Liu had beaten Naidan. So, that's pretty interesting. It does suggest that, under certain circumstances, Liu is stronger than Naidan, and Naidan was pretty strong. So that's fairly interesting. And I am wondering what exactly the strategy for beating someone like Naidan is. Because Naidan was a fucking tank. You pretty much had to fight to kill and also fight very erratically in a way that he wasn't really able to predict in order to beat Naidan. So I'm wondering how exactly Liu managed to pull that off. He does do this double kick on Nitoku at the end of the chapter, and that does seem to work. So it's probably going to be something with these very sudden attacks that kind of flow into each other, doing a bunch of different stuff. I'm fairly interested to see it. I do think, based on this chapter, the way that Liu is sort of being built up as the underdog and kind of the main character of the fight, I am finding it more likely than not that Liu is ultimately going to be the winner by the end of this fight. We still haven't had any more allusions to whether or not Nitoku's the worm. The worm really hasn't been brought up. I've seen some people suggest that Nitoku will not be revealed as the worm during the fight, but after the tournament, when they're all leaving, we'll have something that reveals Nitoku as a worm member. I could see that happening. So far, we haven't really gotten anything to suggest that, but we'll have to see what happens. We're still at the start of the fight. I imagine this is gonna go on for another 3 chapters? I don't know, maybe it could end up being on the shorter end. We'll have to see, because it's gotten off to a really quick start. If I had to guess, I assume next chapter we're going to be seeing a flashback to Liu fighting Naidan, so we get an explanation for what exactly Liu's strategy for beating Nitoku is going to be. And of course, get a little bit more information about Liu and Naidan's friendship, what was going on between them over the years, which is something I'm very interested in, because I feel like that made Naidan more interesting as a character, rather than him just being this crazy worm member. Which is why Naidan, I think, is still one of the better Purgatory members we've met thus far. So I'm very excited for that, and I hope you are too. So, if you enjoyed this review, please be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you don't miss any of my uploads. I do Kengan Omega chapter reviews every week. I cover a few other series on my channel, so if you're interested in checking those out, you can take a look at the playlists on my channel. If you enjoyed discussing Kengan Omega with other people, or you just enjoy the content I produce on this channel, I highly suggest you check out my Discord server. I have a link to that down in the description. Since it's the end of the video, it's time to give a shout out to my wonderful patrons, and the recipients of the shout out today will be Archbear, CJ2K, Fuse, Neo, and Tyrese Simmons. Thank you all very much for supporting me on Patreon. I greatly appreciate it. And if you too want to get a shout out at the end of videos or access to some extra content, you can always become a patron as well. There's a link to my Patreon down in the description. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys around. Take care.